What happens when a beloved sitcom star faces off against late-night television's most notorious host? You won't believe what unfolds when David Schwimmer sits down with Stephen Colbert, expecting a lighthearted chat about his career, only to find himself trapped in a verbal minefield that would ultimately lead to one of the most shocking exits in late-night history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. The Ed Sullivan Theater was buzzing with anticipation as David Schwimmer made his way to the guest chair, the familiar Friends theme song still echoing in the minds of audience members who had grown up watching Ross Geller's romantic mishaps. What should have been a celebration of Schwimmer's latest directorial project quickly transformed into a masterclass in how not to treat a guest. As Colbert's trademark smugness reached new heights of condescension, the trouble began almost immediately. After Schwimmer settled into his chair, adjusting his tie nervously as the audience's applause died down, Colbert, wearing his signature crooked grin, leaned forward with the predatory gleam of a shark sensing blood in the water. "So, David," he began, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "I have to ask about something that's been bothering me for years. Ross Geller, arguably the most annoying character in television history. How does it feel to be forever associated with a whiny paleontologist who couldn't keep a woman if his life depended on it?" The audience gasped audibly, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. Schwimmer's face flushed red, his jaw tightening as he processed the unexpected attack. This wasn't the playful ribbing he'd come to expect from talk show appearances. This was character assassination disguised as comedy. That's quite a way to start an interview, Stephen," Schwimmer replied, his voice carefully controlled but betraying the hurt beneath the surface. Ross was a complex character dealing with divorce, fatherhood, and finding love again. "I think millions of fans would disagree with your assessment." But Colbert wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms wide in mock surprise. "Oh, I'm sorry, did I strike a nerve? I mean, let's be honest here," the guy said. "We were on a break more times than a broken record. And don't even get me started on that whole unaggy nonsense. I mean, come on, David. Even you have to admit that was cringeworthy." The late-night host's words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Schwimmer's composure began to crack. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles white with tension. "Stephen, I came here to talk about my new film, not to have my life's work torn apart for your amusement." Ross resonated with people because he was human, flawed, and relatable. Something you might understand if you weren't so busy being cruel for cheap laughs. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the genuine anger building in their guest. This wasn't the usual back-and-forth banter they'd come to expect from Colbert's show. This was personal, raw, and increasingly ugly. Colbert's grin widened, feeding off the tension like a vampire drawing blood. "Oh, come now, David. You're being awfully sensitive for someone who made millions playing a character who threw tantrums whenever he didn't get his way. Speaking of tantrums, I heard some interesting stories about your behavior on set. Care to comment on reports that you were, shall we say, difficult to work with?" The accusation hit Schwimmer like a physical blow. His eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed with barely contained rage. "That's completely false, and you know it. I worked with the same cast and crew for 10 years, and we're still friends to this day. Where are you getting this garbage?" "Sources, David. I have sources," Colbert replied with theatrical mystery, waving his hand dismissively. "But hey, maybe they're just bitter because they didn't get to ride the gravy train of Friends residuals. Must be nice to get paid for doing nothing while the rest of us actually work for a living." The insult was so blatant, so unnecessarily cruel, that even the audience seemed stunned into silence. Schwimmer's face cycled through a spectrum of emotions: hurt, anger, disbelief, and finally, a cold fury that made the temperature in the studio seem to drop several degrees. "I can't believe you're doing this," Schwimmer said, his voice low and dangerous. "I've been nothing but respectful to you, and you're attacking me personally, professionally, and spreading lies about my character. What is wrong with you?" Colbert shrugged, his casual dismissal of Schwimmer's distress only adding fuel to the fire. "Hey, I'm just asking the questions America wants answered. Like, for instance, do you ever feel guilty about being part of the whitest show in television history? I mean, Friends was set in New York City, and somehow you all managed to avoid having any meaningful relationships with people of color. That's quite an achievement in a city as diverse as New York. The attack was calculated, designed to wound, and it found its mark. Schwimmer's face went pale, then flushed red again as he struggled to maintain his composure. That's not fair, Stephen. That's not fair at all. We've all acknowledged that the show could have been more diverse, and we've learned from that. But to weaponize it against me personally is it's despicable. Oh, so now I'm despicable. Colbert laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the studio. I'm just pointing out the obvious. You and your friends made a fortune playing characters who lived in a fantasy version of New York where diversity didn't exist. And now you want to come on my show and promote your little indie film like you're some sort of serious artist? Please. The contempt in Colbert's voice was palpable, and Schwimmer's hands began to shake with suppressed rage. You know what, Stephen? I've been in this business for over 30 years. I've directed, I've acted, I've produced. I've worked with incredible actors of all backgrounds, and I've tried to use my platform to make a difference. But you're just a bully hiding behind a desk, tearing people down to make yourself feel important. The accusation struck home, and for a moment, Colbert's mask slipped. His eyes flashed with genuine anger, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its theatrical quality, becoming sharp and personal. A bully? That's rich coming from someone who's been coasting on one role for decades. Tell me, David, what have you actually accomplished since Friends ended? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a whole lot of nothing. The cruelty of the statement was breathtaking in its precision. Schwimmer recoiled as if he'd been slapped, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly as he struggled to process the viciousness of the attack. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what felt less like an interview and more like a public execution. I can't believe you just said that, Schwimmer finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I've directed films, I've worked in theater, I've raised millions for charity. But you don't care about any of that, do you? You just want to humiliate me on national television. Colbert leaned forward, his smile now completely devoid of warmth. I want to give my audience what they deserve, the truth. And the truth is, David, that you're a one-trick pony who's been living off past glory for years. Your new film? It's going straight to streaming because no one cares enough to see it in theaters. That's the real story here. The words hit Schwimmer like a series of body blows, each one designed to inflict maximum damage. His breathing became shallow, his face a mask of pain and rage. The man who had once brought joy to millions as Ross Geller was being systematically destroyed by a host who seemed to take perverse pleasure in his guests' suffering. Stop, Schwimmer said, his voice cracking with emotion. Just stop. This isn't journalism. This isn't comedy. This is cruelty. Pure and simple. But Colbert was relentless, sensing his prey was wounded and moving in for the kill. Oh, now you want me to stop? Where was this sensitivity when you were making millions playing a character who treated women like objects? Rachel deserved better than Ross. And frankly, so does this audience. They deserve better than watching a has-been actor pretend he's still relevant. The final insult hung in the air like a death sentence, and something inside David Schwimmer finally snapped. The careful control he'd maintained throughout the brutal assault crumbled, replaced by a rage so pure and righteous that it seemed to fill the entire studio. His hands gripped the chair arms so tightly that his knuckles went white, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of dignity and professional pride. You want to know what I think, Stephen? Schwimmer said, his voice rising with each word. I think you're a sad, bitter man who gets his kicks from tearing down people who've actually accomplished something with their lives. You sit behind this desk night after night, making jokes about people who are out there actually creating, actually contributing to the world, while you contribute nothing but negativity and hate. The studio fell silent, the audience holding its collective breath as they witnessed the complete breakdown of what was supposed to be a simple talk show appearance. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether to keep rolling or look away from the carnage unfolding before them. But this was only the beginning. The real explosion was yet to come, and what happened next would make television history for all the wrong reasons. Colbert's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction as he watched Schwimmer's composure disintegrate before the live audience. The host had drawn blood, and like a predator sensing weakness, he pressed his advantage with surgical precision. "Oh, David," he said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Did I hurt your feelings? Are you going to cry on my show? Because that would really complete the pathetic picture you're painting here tonight." The audience gasped collectively, some members actually covering their mouths in shock at the unprecedented cruelty unfolding before them. This wasn't the Stephen Colbert they thought they knew. This was someone else entirely, someone who seemed to take genuine pleasure in psychological torture. Schwimmer's face had gone ashen, his breathing shallow and rapid. His hands trembled as he gripped the armrests of his chair, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to stand up and walk away. But something deeper than dignity kept him planted in that seat. Perhaps it was professional pride, or maybe it was the stubborn determination of a man who refused to be bullied into submission. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Stephen?" Schwimmer said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "You used to be funny. You used to have actual talent. The Colbert Report was brilliant television, satirical and sharp. But this isn't comedy. This is just a desperate man trying to stay relevant by destroying others." The counterattack landed like a physical blow. Colbert's smile faltered for just a moment, a crack in his armor that revealed the insecurity lurking beneath. But instead of backing down, he doubled down, his voice rising with barely contained fury. "Oh, so now you're a television critic? That's rich coming from someone whose biggest dramatic role was playing a dinosaur enthusiast who couldn't pronounce pivot correctly." "At least I brought joy to people," Schwimmer shot back, his own voice rising to match Colbert's intensity. "At least when people watched me, they laughed with me, not at me. Can you say the same? Because right now, Stephen, you're not making anyone laugh. You're just making them uncomfortable." The truth of those words seemed to hang in the air like a toxic cloud. Several audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and a few actually stood up and began making their way toward the exits. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was a bloodbath, and they wanted no part of it. Colbert's face flushed red with rage, his carefully constructed television persona crumbling in real time. "You want to talk about making people uncomfortable? Let's talk about how uncomfortable it must be for your friends' co-stars to watch you desperately trying to recapture past glory. I heard Jennifer Aniston crosses the street when she sees you coming. Is that true, David?" The lie was so blatant, so unnecessarily vicious, that even Schwimmer's mounting anger was momentarily replaced by pure disbelief. That's completely fabricated. Jennifer is one of my closest friends. We talk regularly. We support each other's projects. Why would you even say something like that?" "Because it's fun," Colbert replied with a shark-like grin. "Because watching you squirm is the most entertaining thing that's happened on this show in months. Face it, David, you're a relic, a has-been clinging to relevance by appearing on talk shows to promote movies nobody wants to see." The personal attacks were relentless, each one designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. Schwimmer's face cycled through a spectrum of emotions: hurt, anger, disbelief, and finally, a cold fury that seemed to transform him entirely. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of a man who had reached his absolute breaking point. "You know what I think happened here, Stephen? I think you invited me on this show specifically to humiliate me. I think you planned this whole thing, wrote out these cruel little sound bites, and decided you were going to destroy me for your own sick amusement. Well, congratulations. You've succeeded in showing everyone exactly who you really are." The accusation hit its mark, and Colbert's mask slipped completely. Gone was the theatrical host, replaced by a man whose ego had been wounded and who was now lashing out like a cornered animal. "Oh, please. You think I need to plan to make you look bad? You're doing a fine job of that all by yourself. Sitting there, whining about how unfair life is, how mean the big bad talk show host is being to you. It's pathetic." "What's pathetic?" Schwimmer replied, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his eyes. "Is a grown man who gets his rocks off by tearing down guests who come on his show in good faith. You've turned this into some kind of sick power trip, and frankly, it says a lot more about you than it does about me." The studio had become a pressure cooker, the tension so thick it was almost visible. Camera operators exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut away from the carnage. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what felt less like an interview and more like a public execution. But Colbert wasn't finished. If anything, Schwimmer's resistance only seemed to fuel his cruelty. Power trip? That's interesting. Coming from someone who allegedly terrorized craft services workers on the Friends set. I heard you once made a catering assistant cry because your sandwich wasn't cut diagonally. Care to comment on that, David? The fabricated story was the final straw. Schwimmer's face went white with rage, his hands shaking as he struggled to maintain even a semblance of control. That never happened. You're literally making up stories to try to destroy my reputation. This is slander, Stephen. This is defamation, and you know it. Prove it. Colbert sneered, leaning forward with predatory glee. Sue me. Take me to court. Oh wait, you can't, because then you'd have to admit that your career is so dead that you need to sue talk show hosts to get attention. Face it, David, you're washed up, irrelevant, and everyone knows it. The words struck Schwimmer like physical blows, each one designed to wound and humiliate. His breathing became ragged, his face a mask of pain and fury. The man who had once brought laughter to millions was being systematically destroyed by a host who seemed to take perverse pleasure in his guests' suffering. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Schwimmer said, his voice barely above a whisper. You're actually getting off on this. Watching me suffer, watching me struggle, it's like some kind of sick entertainment for you. Absolutely. Colbert replied without hesitation, his grin widening. Because this is what real television looks like. Not your sanitized, lowest common denominator. Sitcom garbage, but actual human drama. Raw, unfiltered, and completely authentic. You should thank me, David. This is the most interesting you've been in 20 years. The cruelty was breathtaking in its purity. Schwimmer recoiled as if he'd been slapped, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly as he struggled to process the viciousness of the attack. The audience sat in horrified silence, witnessing what felt less like comedy and more like psychological torture. I can't believe you're doing this, Schwimmer finally managed, his voice cracking with emotion. I came here as your guest, in good faith, to promote my work and have a conversation. Instead, you've turned this into some kind of gladiator arena where you get to be the emperor giving the thumbs down. Oh, spare me the dramatics. Colbert shot back, his voice dripping with contempt. You're an actor, David. Act like you have some dignity instead of sitting there like a whipped dog. Although I suppose that's probably the most honest portrayal of your current career status. The insult was so cruel, so unnecessarily personal, that several audience members actually stood up and began heading for the exits. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was a public humiliation, and they wanted no part of it. But for those who remained, the worst was yet to come that Schwimmer's face had gone through the full spectrum of emotions and had now settled into something cold and dangerous. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man who had been pushed beyond his breaking point and was now ready to push back with everything he had. You know what, Stephen? I figured out what this is really about. This isn't about me, or friends, or my career. This is about you. You're threatened by actors who've actually accomplished something lasting, who've created something that people love and remember. Because when your show ends, when you retire, what will you be remembered for? Cruelty? Bullying? Is that really the legacy you want to leave behind? The words struck home like a guided missile, and for the first time since the interview began, Colbert looked genuinely shaken. His smile faltered, his eyes flickered with something that might have been doubt, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its theatrical quality. Don't you dare lecture me about legacy, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I've been doing this for 20 years, entertaining millions of people, making them laugh, making them think. What have you done lately besides living off residuals and making terrible movies nobody watches? I've lived with dignity, Schwimmer replied, his voice rising with righteous anger. I've treated people with respect. I've used my platform to help others, and I've never once invited someone onto my show just to humiliate them for sport. Can you say the same? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment where everything would either de-escalate or explode into something unprecedented. Unfortunately for everyone involved, Stephen Colbert chose the nuclear option. You want to talk about dignity, David? Colbert said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Let's talk about the real reason you're here tonight. Let's talk about why a supposedly successful actor is desperately making the rounds on talk shows to promote a movie that's already been dumped by its distributors. The studio fell dead silent. Schwimmer's face went pale, his eyes widening in disbelief at what he was hearing. That's not true, Schwimmer stammered, but there was something in his voice that suggested Colbert had struck closer to home than anyone had expected. The film has a limited release strategy. Colbert's grin widened like a predator scenting blood. Oh, David, do you really think I don't do my research? Do you think I don't know about the 3 studios that passed on your little passion project? Do you think I don't know about the investor who pulled out at the last minute, leaving you scrambling to finance it yourself? Each revelation hit Schwimmer like a physical blow. His face cycled through shock, hurt, and finally, a rage so pure and primal that it seemed to transform him entirely. How dare you? Schwimmer whispered, his voice barely audible, but carrying the weight of absolute fury. How dare you use my personal struggles as ammunition for your sick little game? You're not a comedian, Stephen. You're not even a talk show host. You're a predator. The accusation struck the studio like a lightning bolt. Audience members gasped, some covering their mouths in shock, others pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a historic moment in television history. But Colbert wasn't finished. A predator? That's rich coming from someone whose own agent won't return his calls. Yes, David, I know about that too. I know about the meetings that got canceled, the projects that disappeared, the slow, painful slide into irrelevance. And you know what the beautiful part is? Everyone in Hollywood knows it too. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and something inside David Schwimmer finally shattered completely. Years of professional disappointment and personal struggles had been weaponized against him by a man who seemed to take genuine pleasure in his pain. You know what, Stephen? Schwimmer said, his voice rising with each word. You're right. My career isn't what it used to be. The phone doesn't ring as often, and yes, financing is harder to come by. But you know what I've never lost? My soul, my humanity, my basic decency toward other human beings. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The audience watched in fascination and horror as one of television's most beloved actors finally reached his breaking point. On live television, I've spent 30 years in this business, Schwimmer continued, his voice now carrying to every corner of the studio. And I've never once treated another person the way you've treated me tonight. I have never encountered someone as fundamentally cruel as you are in this moment. Colbert, perhaps sensing that he had pushed too far, tried to regain control. Oh, come on, David. It's just television. It's just entertainment. Just entertainment. Schwimmer's voice cracked with emotion. You've spent the last 20 minutes systematically destroying my reputation on national television, and you want to dismiss it as just entertainment? You've lied about me, slandered me, and turned what should have been a simple interview into a public execution. The raw pain in Schwimmer's voice was palpable, and even some of the crew members looked uncomfortable. This wasn't the polished, controlled environment of a typical talk show. This was real, unfiltered human emotion erupting in the most public way possible. You want to know what's really pathetic here, Stephen? Schwimmer continued. It's not my career struggles. What's pathetic is a man who has been given a platform to bring joy and insight to millions of people, and instead chooses to use that platform to tear others down. The accusation hit its mark, and for the first time since the interview began, Colbert looked genuinely uncomfortable. His smile faltered, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its theatrical quality. Look, David, maybe we got a little heated here. A little heated? Schwimmer's voice rose to near shouting levels. You've spent the last 20 minutes trying to destroy me as a person, and you want to call it a little heated? You've attacked my character, my career, my relationships, and now you want to minimize it? The studio was electric with tension. Audience members sat transfixed, witnessing what was clearly becoming one of the most explosive moments in late-night television history. I came here tonight in good faith, Schwimmer continued, his voice now carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. I came here to talk about my work, to connect with your audience. Instead, I've been subjected to a level of cruelty that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And the worst part? You seem to be enjoying it. He turned to face the audience directly, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. This is what passes for entertainment now. Watching a host systematically destroy A guest for sport? Well, I won't be part of it. I won't sit here and let this man continue to abuse me for your amusement." The power of his words seemed to galvanize the studio. Several audience members began applauding, slowly at first, then with growing intensity. Others stood up, expressing their disgust with what they had witnessed. Colbert, realizing that he had lost control of the situation entirely, made one final desperate attempt to regain his authority. "David, please sit down. Let's finish the interview like professionals." "Professionals?" Schwimmer's laugh was bitter and hollow. "There's nothing professional about what you've done here tonight, Stephen. You've shown your true colors, and they're ugly. You've revealed yourself to be nothing more than a bully with a television show, and I won't give you one more second of my time or dignity." He began walking toward the edge of the stage, his movements deliberate and purposeful. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of television's most beloved actors prepared to walk out on one of late night's biggest shows. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Stephen?" Schwimmer said, pausing at the edge of the stage to deliver his final words. "You had the chance to have a real conversation with someone who's spent his life trying to bring joy to others. Instead, you chose cruelty. You chose to tear down rather than build up." The words hung in the air like a final judgment, and the studio erupted. Some audience members were on their feet applauding, others were booing Colbert, and still others were simply sitting in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. "This interview is over," Schwimmer announced, his voice carrying clearly through the tumult. "I'm done being your punching bag, Stephen. Find someone else to torture for your sick amusement." And with that, David Schwimmer walked off the stage, leaving behind a studio in complete chaos, an audience in shock, and a host who had revealed himself to be something far uglier than anyone had ever imagined. The cameras continued rolling as Stephen Colbert sat alone at his desk, his carefully constructed persona in ruins, facing the consequences of his cruelty. David Schwimmer had walked away with his integrity intact, while Stephen Colbert was left to face the judgment of an audience that had seen him at his absolute worst.